So, hey everybody, as we just started recording, let me just say hi formally. This is Kristin Drysdale, and my name is Thomas Lynn, and just thought we'd talk. I ran into Kristin a few weeks ago. She had, I think it was just last week, hosted a blab about this topic, and I think you might have heard one of my blabs about. I want to say it was about Thoreau, but that was a few weeks ago. But Thoreau, Henry David Thoreau.
Oh yeah, that was the one where I didn't have the sound like for a lot of it. Like I couldn't for some reason I couldn't hear you, but I could see what was in the I thought the topic was perfect. Like it was really interesting and different. And so I wanted to be there so bad, and I just couldn't get my sound to work. And then I finally did at the end.
So I'm sorry about that. So.
Oh no, it wasn't your thing; it was mine.
Yeah, we should. If anybody hasn't read it recently, you should go back and revisit Henry David Thoreau's essay. It was actually originally entitled "On Resistance to Civil Government," but more generally is published under the moniker Civil Disobedience, and it's actually a rather uncomfortable essay to read because it's far more, I would say, radical in its suggestiveness than one might expect, given that it does have a kind of place in the standard American curriculum. But that is for another conversation, though we may come back to it in the course of this one. Our point of departure was cultural appropriation. And why don't I ask you, Kristin, to go ahead and try and render a definition, at least as a first blush definition of cultural appropriation, just to get the ball rolling.
Sure. Okay, so cultural appropriation occurs when a dominant group uses something that is from another culture, that the culture is a minority of some sort, and they gain from it, and it's like the direct or indirect purpose is to keep one's elevated station. If you have more power, then it's not going to be fair. This is how people feel who make the argument that it's something that we need to be aware of. They feel like it's not fair that the dominant group gets to have, they get to take over, what is their only thing that they have to hold on to. I mean, probably have done a better job, but
it's helpful perhaps to grant some examples. Is there an example?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so with braids, for instance, women of I never know how to say this because it's not always African American, but with the hair that they braid it because it's a certain texture, and it originally was braided to keep a neat hairstyle, and it was more for cleanliness factors than style. And there have been issues where women have been, teachers have been told that they can't have their hair that way because it goes into that gray area of ethnic pride, and then someone who.
So there you're.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so there's actually several layers going on there, where a practice, which in a way was at first time around just kind of matter of fact, okay, we're fixing our hair in this way as you know, just in response to like a certain hygienic demand. But then you become inserted into a cultural matrix where you are the minority. You know, you're black in a dominant white culture.
Yeah.
And then this practice, which actually initially might not have that much aesthetic significance, suddenly assumes an aesthetic and a political significance, which is highlighted by the fact that you have, you know, a teacher being told that they can't wear their hair in that way because it's threatening and indicative of a disequilibrium, which we're not supposed to admit exists. We're supposed to be, right, a post racism culture. So that means like, oh, well, you know, it's not going to be offensive for, you know, people to wear their hair however that they want. But the idea that, but in fact, it is offensive because there is this latent disequilibrium that we're not supposed to address. Is that what you're driving there?
Yes, yeah.
So that's a little bit different than cultural appropriation, right? Because cultural appropriation would be, or what it is, it's sort of a transformation in the cultural power of something like a hairstyle, because initially it's kind of matter of fact, but then it becomes this political tool. But then the cultural appropriation takes place at like the next phase, right? Where you have white suburban teenagers suddenly wearing their hair like this as a sign of defiance. Is that inaccurate?
Yes, and then they get praised for being original. So I can understand how it would not feel fair. There's basically like there's acculturation, assimilation, and appropriation or misappropriation. And I kind of like the term misappropriation a little bit better because I don't think that this is where I think it gets really tricky, because I don't think that the people who are like using like the girls, the white girls who are braiding their hair, I'll just say it. I don't think that their intent is to do anything to harm someone. I really don't think that that's at the heart of it. So I think that the miss is a little bit more clear and fair.
Yeah, so there's a problem of consciousness there, right? Relative consciousness. Why do you elaborate on that? Because like you said, that a lot of people are quite innocent in using.
Right, and they have no idea that it would even be a problem. They think of it more as a cultural exchange. So let me see. I'm going to pull up this one article because it was really kind of interesting. This is the one that made me think about all of it in the first place, because I've always been like, the more blended we can be, the better. And then this article made me think. She's giving an example of going to like a Halloween party where you've got a costume and you think it's great, it's wonderful, and then you show up and then someone gets offended because when you're dressing as another race, it can come off as offensive and not very sensitive. Okay, for one example, Pocahontas. It's kind of odd that there are lots of little girls that dress up as Pocahontas and they don't know the story. They don't know the history of it. And it's really odd that Disney has Pocahontas singing when things were not easy.
Yeah, it's odd.
Like, it was not a fairy tale.
It's odd, but it's also not odd because the Disney company, for better or for worse, occupies a certain position where they provide blocks of myth if you like, to underwrite the American story. And so what they're doing, in my view, is they are domesticating history. They're taking something which is actually just rife with unspeakable tragedy, and then they're painting over it in a way which allows for the suppression of that history. So I like the concept of domestication there, because the same thing happens, I think, with lots of major religions. If you look at their fountainheads, where they have a strong assertion of love, radical love, which transcends cultural boundaries as their message. Well, that message is incredibly dangerous to establish power structures. So subsequently, that message is domesticated and made to serve the power structures. And so, for example, in the case of Christianity, you can make a distinction between prophetic, if you like, and Constantinian Christianity. And I think that happens still in the U.S. culture, where the Christian, the original radicalism of the gospel, and I'm not actually a Christian. I think that the person of Jesus represents a politically radical figure.
In history, yeah.
In history,
for
sure. Has been appropriated by conservative elements to serve established structures that are closely aligned with movements of racially based and class-based oppression. So, I mean, that's kind of my own little thing, okay? But it's just one example of how cultural appropriation is significant. And so you gave like the example of the Halloween party, and I think that came up a few weeks ago at one of the Ivy League campuses. But are there any other examples which you would
that I can think of,
like to invoke?
Trying to think.
Or another direction which we might go is that you could maybe talk a little bit about the tension between the idea of a broad human nation, right? Human identity. And then, to what degree does our identity as a human being rely on our participation in a specific culture? How do you address that tension?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the question, really. And I think that if it were easy to answer, that we wouldn't have the confusion that we have. A lot of people who are not able to feel what the minority group is feeling, they can't even begin to understand, and they therefore feel like it's being made into a bigger issue, and that it's just another barrier.
Why do you think that breakdown in sympathy or empathy occurs? Why do people feel challenging to relate with oppressed? I mean, I guess some people may say that the very fact that I've introduced the category of oppression into the discussion is problematic. They may think that I'm overstating it, but why do you feel that people have that difficulty in like saying, well, why do these people feel oppressed, or what have you?
I think it's difficult to accept the responsibility of people who we may be related to, but we never knew. It's a different kind of timeline, and it's hard to wrap your mind around the consequences of a society that is no longer present. We don't have the same segregated areas. There may be places in the country where it is like the Moors of that area to be segregated, but by law, we don't have that anymore.
So, in other words, within certain portions or on certain people's parts, the fact of legal desegregation is enough. They think the fact that that in legal principle, the fact that we don't have a strong distinction between or among races is adequate. And they don't necessarily appreciate that despite that legality, the reality is still one of segregation. It's a culturally enforced segregation.
Yes.
So in a way, it's subtler. It's more insidious in a way. When you have like a law, it's like there you can point at the law and say there.
That needs to be changed,
Right,
and it's
right,
wrong,
okay.
and whatnot, and everyone can find around this thing that is the evil of society. But then once the evil is eradicated, you're still left with the consequences of what it's done to the people.
So, basically, we're talking principally about African Americans then, and the appropriation.
It could be,
but it's a broad.
I don't think it has to be just
like Native Americans have been, for example.
I mean, Irish people, Chinese people, Japanese people. They have, there's all sorts of culturally oppressed peoples within at least our nation's timeline.
So where is from where trying to say well, how do you speak to people who think cultural appropriation is just okay? I'm just trying to imagine, if you have I
don't know that anyone would think that cultural appropriation is okay. I think they would be more likely to label it differently.
How do you think that they would?
I'm leaving. You're more than welcome to stay.
How do you?
Randy, thank you.
I'm sorry, I was distracted. How do you?
They would probably see it more as a cultural exchange.
Okay, so let's look at that notion then, right? So the cultural exchange is what? The space like an even playing field, right? So the idea that you have the adoption of, say, a French, some sort of French idiom within England, okay, even though they're on relative par. Right? This goes crazy, because you're like, oh, goodness, how can you say that they're on par, right? So it's like you're walking through a minefield here, because then you can argue that, there's a tension between the English and the French within the construction of European identity and and you can really get lost with that sort of thing. But I guess the real question, and maybe I've just sort of pointed at it there by my remark, is cultural exchange really a possibility? Is there really such a thing as benign cultural exchange, or is that sort of just some concept which we can employ to evade dealing with the responsibility of our actual power structures? Do you think that there's such a thing as cultural exchange?
Okay, so say you have a friend who has a traditional Indian wedding, and everyone is wearing traditional Indian dress, and to blend in, to show respect, you wear the appropriate attire. I think that is a form of cultural exchange. You're putting yourself into that cultural environment. You're going into their space.
But that's sort of the crucial thing, right?
And then it becomes your space.
It's whether you take something out of that space and then reinsert it into your own subsequently.
Yes. and like erase all of the meaning attached to the original use.
Now, we have Daniel here. We let him jump in. That's so.
There's another term too that we need to fit in here at some point. Hi.
So,
and that's cultural assimilation.
And I concur. And actually, I find that in a way even more disturbing than cultural appropriation.
Completely.
So let's go ahead and tackle that next. But Daniel,
let's get your thoughts.
Yes, so you jump in. What are your thoughts?
Yes,
I know you're involved with this in vis-a-vis Hawaii, for example. So go ahead.
Yeah. So sorry. What like in what definition of assimilation?
Well, initially we were talking, as you know, may have noted.
I heard a bit, yeah.
About cultural appropriation, where you say that the dominant culture takes an element of a minority segment within a society and then uses it without necessarily deference to the context of that element's origin. Cultural assimilation, by contrast, well, maybe I should ask, because there's two ways you could go with that. In what sense did you use the notion? Are you wanting to discuss the notion of cultural assimilation, Kristin?
Oh, I'm just open table. Yeah, cool. I don't claim to have any answers.
Yeah.
So for my part, what that term means is where you try and suppress and subordinate a person, or you want to take a person's identity and connect it more or less straightforwardly with the dominant culture so that they're no longer tempted to assert resistance to that dominance or hegemony, to use another fancy pants word, because I like fancy pants words, which is
even in text.
That's countercultural. I'm countercultural. So that's how I understand it. So, for example, in Hawaii, I would say that the idea of asserting that Hawaiians are an American state is an act of attempted cultural assimilation that seeks to suppress the colonial history and theft of Hawaii by American imperial interests. So that's how I understand the term, though I'm open to having that modified. So with that, is that a adequate response for you?
Yeah. No, I like that. I think that's like an interesting, because I was thinking when you first said cultural assimilation of just like willingly like assimilating to whatever, like the mainstream culture. But I think the way you're using it is like you're assimilating another culture into yours. And that's certainly the case, I think, of what was attempted in the project of the United States.
So, like pop cultural, like the pop cultural, like way to understand assimilation is the Borg, right? In Star Trek, right? You will be assimilated. We will take your biological and technological distinctiveness and make it part of our own. In a way, what cultural appropriation then becomes under this rubric is a particular tactic whereby cultural assimilation is accomplished. You appropriate elements of a culture that's being colonized and make it part of the American culture, the British culture, the Roman culture, what have you, and consequently are moved to a kind of amnesia with regard to the integrity of the original dominated culture. And that is actually perhaps why cultural appropriation is so problematic, because it is part of a broader process, that of cultural assimilation, which I'm just making that connection right now off the cuff. So I think, thank you, Kristin, for pointing out the integral and related nature of both those terms. Yeah. So what do you think there, Daniel? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because I totally agree You know, yeah, I mean, I think it's just like I was listening to a bit of your conversation earlier, and it's always going to be a tough one in the U.S. With the history of. So I guess I would just take it in a different direction if that's okay. Like just this whole topic for me, it's just like it will never be like the way that I understand cultural appropriation these days. Like I was an anthropology major and stuff, and I struggled with it for forever, you know. And like the way I understand it now is pretty simply, I've made it much more like political and economic, and just in the sense that like if we're not gonna give Native Americans, Hawaiians, you know, the Aboriginal people of the Western Hemisphere, like their own governing structures, then we're still taking, like to this day, because we've taken the land, and it's not like something that happened, you know, it's something that happens now continuously with like water rights and you know, on and on and on, all kinds of you know, land rights, land issues, and you know, the treaties were never, you know, we never stuck to them, as like the Americans never stuck to them. You know, with Hawaii, the same thing. And so I would say like political in that sense, that we haven't given Aboriginal peoples of the Western Hemisphere their own states, really.
And I just, yeah, it's interesting. I just wanted to point out that even the language, like the way we're also affected by the language, like you're like, the way you said how we haven't,
so tentative.
We haven't given, and I was going to know like, oh, we haven't given them their own states. And see, even that phrase presumes.
Oh yeah,
right,
like
right.
Who's to say that it was ever ours to give? Like we took.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, I totally agree. It's tough. Like I think you guys were saying earlier, it's like a linguistic minefield, you know.
Yeah. Because
what do you say? You know, even like the dominant culture, it's like, you know, so like somebody's like subservient, you know, it's on and on. It's so hard, you know, to recognize.
Yeah, and I hate saying minority too.
Like who's the minority in the world, you know? Caucasian, you know.
I just think like just the sound of minority, like it sounds like it's something lesser, and so I don't even like that word at all. Right.
Yeah, and it's like inaccurate, you know, the way we really use it.
There's a both strong points in and of themselves, and then just to go back to something you said a few moments ago, which didn't occur to me, about how this question perhaps is especially difficult in an American context, because Americans like to construct their identity with the tip of the hat to the notion of the melting pot, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, we're all these different cultures hanging out together, and you know that's supposed to be part of what it is to be American.
Knock on wood so far.
So, but you know, we have to be very disciplined about that appreciation, especially in light of the fact that it can be used to distract from how cultural appropriation, which seems like to be like, you know, actively multicultural, really it puts you in a position where participating in cultural appropriation becomes very tempting. The other side of that coin is you can...
Yeah, it can feel like a middle ground.
Right. You know, and you could go like look at the identity politics of the 80s and how that sort of fractured, because you see, like, I want to come down on the side of the oppressed. I want to resist the power structures. I want to, you know, stand up, right? But then what happens, this is going in a different direction, I guess, but you say, like, who are the oppressed, and how do we, as, you know, if you identify as like part of, you know, but personally, I benefit from being, you know, middle class, white, pretty, you know, pretty fortunate, right? So, but abstracting from that and theoretically identifying with oppressed groups such as African Americans. How does one establish a sense of solidarity apart from the circumstance of oppression? Because then it seems like if your solidarity is only predicated on your oppression, you create a problem where you're only realizing legitimacy oppositionally. And it seems that we have to establish.
I got lost on that last part. Could you?
In other words, I'm sorry, I'm blah, 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 blah. To try and. How does one, as a member of an oppressed group, establish one's identity without relying on the notion of opposition, like I am oppressed, right? Because then it's like even by identifying as being oppressed, you're almost already giving power to the oppressor.
Right.
So how do you step out of that dyad? And then I guess we can ask, how does that process relate to the questions of cultural assimilation and appropriation?
Do you want to take a swing at it, Kristin?
Well, I just wanted to explain, I guess, that when you first said that, the reason why I was confused was because I thought that you were talking about someone outside of the oppressed group, and so I was like, wait, what? But the way that you explained it that time, like, totally get it, and that's so right. It's dividing, no matter how you color it.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
Yeah.
Let's welcome Paul in. Paul, hello.
Hey, Paul.
Thanks.
How are y'all doing?
With my audio.
I feel spoiled. I get to see you so often.
Thanks for listening. So, I mean, what are your thoughts here coming into the conversation, Paul?
I'm gonna listen for a while and then I'm gonna jump in. How's that sound?
Perfect.
That's fine. I think Daniel, you were about to take a swing at that question that I asked about establishing identity without relying on the oppressed oppression.
Yeah. I mean, I love that question actually because it's profound because I think when you dialogue with like a lot of different groups, like a lot of different ethnic struggles or whatever struggles that happen to overlap with ethnicities for better or worse or whatever. I think you hear them talk about that all the time. Like, how do we define ourselves without the struggle? How do we without saying somebody else is oppressing us constantly? Because part of it is like a mental liberation, like which I think you're hinting at. Like, and I think groups all over the world like totally are talking about that all the time. That it's there's the colonization of the mind that goes even deeper, obviously, than all the other stuff, and it's hundreds of years, it's generations and generations. And so, but for me personally, I would just say that like the way I see oppression is like what's the oppression that's still going on. Like, we're the oppressors because there was never reparations for slavery. There was never like and the colonies that got independence, quote unquote, are still run by economic institutions and political institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, and the UN really isn't like it's they're European run, essentially. They're Western run, and so there's really the obvious chains of oppression or whatever are gone, but the economic ones and the political ones are still there. And so for me, it's basically focusing on those things, I think. And that's also like the other thing I think you hinted at, like, how do you form solidarity? You just focus on those things rather than like the cultural aspects, because Europe has its own culture, everywhere has its own culture. There's nothing stopping us from being like culturally whatever, proud or rich, but just focusing on those actual bonds, those chains of bondage that still exist, I think is the most important thing.
I think that if we could form an identity together that is apart from anything that's tied to culture, not saying to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, but if we could form those kind of bonds, I think that would greatly help us. When we experienced 9/11, I saw a lot of the country pulling together, and it didn't matter which subculture one person was a part of prior to that. There's a beautiful famous photograph. I'm sure you guys probably know the one I'm talking about, but there's someone of dark skin and someone with light skin, firefighters walking together. And they were walking, through the remains. Not the best setting, but it was very telling.
I mean, jump in very quickly, like a few points, right? Well, I mean, September 11th is an interesting case point because while at least initially there was a tide, as often happens with other tragedies, such as, say, New Orleans or Katrina or the tsunami a few years ago, you have a sense of like human connection. It seemed lamentably short-lived. Very quickly, in the wake of September 11th, there was a kind of sort of militarization of the event, so that and the exploitation of the event, which is now translated most recently. Well, it's not like it happened yesterday, but it's translated into the increasing marginalization of Muslims in America and sort of a scant perspective with regard to that region and altogether.
A gross overgeneralization.
And so one might think, why is it difficult? I want to ask, why is it difficult not to just sort of like stay with the initial impulse of connection to transcend, these boundaries which exist among us? I guess that's a question to ask, right? Why can't we stay and abide with that initial sort of positive impulse? Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
I think that it's human nature, or like groupthink nature, to desire someone to be the bad guy. It's unfortunate, but it's just what I've observed.
Well, I have some thoughts.
I think that basically, like, just the way that I'm understanding it these days personally, and like for me, it's like, I don't feel like I'm ever right. I'm just like constantly like changing my perspective. But the way I'm thinking about it these days is just that, how can we be truly in solidarity with somebody when, we've stolen lands and we haven't given concessions politically, when we've, built our country on slavery and we haven't given reparations economically and with the colonies. So it's just those things that I don't think personally, I don't think it will ever happen. I don't think will be accepted. The Europeans, the descendants of Europeans, the Westerners.
We'll always be stupid Yankees to them on some level.
I think until we make like economic and political reparations, that's the way I see it. And until then, no.
I mean, you see, it's a very. On the other hand, I think we have to be careful not to lose sight of the human denominator. Okay. Right. So like me, in my capacity as, if I'm going to truly exhibit solidarity, I'm probably obliged to, as far as like renounce the privileges which attach to like the happenstance of my birth.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that me as an individual can, doesn't mean I can't have a sense of solidarity, a sense of sort of connection on a human basis, right?
Right.
And I think that we need to emphasize and build on that possibility. Certainly, I understand why, just looking at me as a white man, some skepticism will naturally come to the fore. But we might ask, what is the condition of possibility which makes that circumstance possible? Okay, and that is the presumption of strong essential differences among us within the population. And I think that often, and this is pushing the conversation in a slightly different direction, the real basis of those differences is socioeconomic, and that the narratives of ethnic distinction, while real and while having significant consequences, sometimes divert us from appreciating the underlying structural basis upon which at least material oppression is based. Is that coherent, or do I need to clarify what I just said in some way?
Okay, could you for a second? Sorry, I'm writing. Thank you for coming, Paul.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. Sorry, of course, you're welcome to jump back in.
Anytime.
Yeah, no, I think I absolutely agree with what you said. I think it's the socioeconomic conditions that are the underpinning of difference in ethnicities. I think we're all pretty much sold that it's a social construct,
Right.
So actually, in the course of talking, I was also thinking, like, it sort of has clarified to me why cultural appropriation is such an important issue. Because of the idea of establishing an identity apart from the happenstance of being in a relationship of oppressed versus oppressor, right? If you're as an oppressed person want to establish an identity apart from being an oppressed person, where are you going to go? Where's your first go-to? The first go-to is your root culture that existed before you entered into that relationship. And so to see that culture then mined by the dominating power is going to be that much more exasperating, because it's as if they're taking away the only resource you had left, which allowed you to establish an identity which wasn't based on opposition.
Exactly.
So for me, the interesting question then becomes, like, it's not easy, right? Okay, but how do you wake up people to the fact that like oppression is happening? Because I don't think that it may be clear to everybody who happens to be on this blab at this moment. But evidently, it's not clear to a very substantial portion of the American population.
And part of the reason for that is because that's not a story that is easy to sell. It's not easy to tell people, okay, get on board with this one, because no one wants to be the oppressor these days.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone wakes up when they're 2 years old and like, Mommy, I'm going to be Napoleon.
Yeah.
But it's funny, though, that you say that, because, yeah, that's true. But what's also true is that then we go ahead and lionize people like Napoleon or Alexander the Great or Norman Rockefeller. Okay, people, okay. These are people that we identify as heroes, but then you're like, why are we lionizing these individuals who are responsible for participating in violence on like a truly massive scale?
question. What do you think about Christopher Columbus?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. The fact. I mean, I think our country is like specifically just built on this stuff. You know, like I think that like I personally kind of think that it's also the responsibility of Europeans like to deal with the history of colonialism, because specifically because it's not over. That's why I think it's like we have an extra responsibility in the West. You know, it's because I know that like people have always invaded other people, and people have colonized, and slavery and all these things are ancient, but like this one is still going on now, and it's going to be like the end of the world, like because we're gonna use up all the resources if we don't stop it. That's why I think it's so important to call out the Europe and the West right now, to just, we have to like bring everybody else on board, and we have to get rid of like these oppressive circumstances, and then we might be able to like save the planet. Like, so that's the big one that I'm always talking, like when people are talking about, you know, environmentalist, you know, stance. Like for me, it's like, how are you going to save the Amazon rainforest if Brazil owes all this money to the IMF, therefore Brazil doesn't have proper roads and hospitals and universities in place in the Amazon region, and you know, people are in poverty and they're going to cut down the rainforest. So you can say the World Wildlife Fund, you know, give them $5 a month, everybody in the planet gives them. It's not going to make a difference if Brazil owes the IMF, you know, more money than they're making.
The thing is, it's, I know of y'all gloom and doom, so I'm going to try and be a little bit more positive in a second. But just an additional point there is that it's not, you know, like Brazil chooses to cooperate with the IMF. Not all Brazilians, but the Brazilian government. You know, there's an established power structure in Brazil which is invested in relating with the broader geopolitical environment.
And in every country, and that's
in every country, not just Right. So, you know, in a way, it becomes a question of the divide between the interests of the people, if you like, and the interests of dominant and governing classes. And it's not. That's just the circumstance which abides within a nation-state framework, at least insofar as the nation-state framework has unfolded thus far. Now,
okay, so
sorry,
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, please, Kristin.
No, you were on a point. Go ahead. I was trying to keep.
I can hold a thought.
Okay. All right, then I'll ask it, because I hate holding thoughts, because I want to just go with the flow. How much do you suppose will be able to have an impact on turning that around now that we have greater globalization via technology and knowledge sharing? The election in Nigeria was very influenced by its people and how they were using social media. If it can be done in a country where they have little opportunity to have connectivity the way that a lot of the rest of the nations do, like, I wonder, do we have a fighting chance?
Daniel, do you want to take a stab at that? I mean, obviously, I've always got something to say.
I mean, me too. I totally think it's gonna be the thing that saves us, the social media and the internet and all this stuff. If we can keep it free and open and stuff, you know, basically, and so far they haven't been able to take that away. And to me, it appears like that was the thing that's going to switch everything around. And if we use it properly, if we, you know, which you guys are absolutely using it properly, you know, this is excellent. Then we have a chance. We have a fighting chance. But if we just get sidetracked by the cats on the internet, then we feel our fate, you know. And it's easily, you know, it's hard because we're getting busier and busier as we're getting more and more connected. We're you know, we have like less and less time. We have more and more gadgets, less and less time, and so, you know, look how many people are on Blab, for instance. Like it's actually really small, because it takes time. You have to sit here and you have to talk, you know.
I was actually kind of thinking that it looked like we had a lot of people on tonight.
Yeah, no, it's a lot for Blab though, right? Like, but I don't know. I mean, it is cool. Like I really like. I'm getting really into all the social media right now. You know, I think it's a huge advantage that we have as the populace.
Though comparatively, Blab user numbers may be lower than some other platforms.
Mm-hmm.
I guarantee you we are a lot more connected as a community
mm-hmm.
than any other platform.
That's
because
true.
we get into each other's rooms and we have these long, in-depth discussions.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm actually somewhat sanguine about like the framework here on Blab. If you know, one can stabilize it precisely because it promotes that level of engagement. In a different way, you're like actually having a conversation. It also kind of indicate some of the weirdnesses that accompany like the virtual world, which accompanies the physical world now, because like we're all these spatially disparate locations, and that's kind of odd when you really sort of like let the significance of that sink in terms of a relationship with space and time. I went ahead and muted Daniel there for a second. He had some noise there. But to get back to your question, like, do you think we have a fighting chance? Well, I'm cautiously optimistic, maybe more than cautiously optimistic, because of faith I had in human beings generally. You know, I think it's an incredibly encouraging point that usually there are only a few gross malefactors. Okay, there's only a few bad apples. The vast majority of people are striving to live decently. Okay, and additionally, I lost my thread for a second. Oh, well, no, it's my fault. Additionally, you know, that's almost like a point of like faith. You almost have to believe in the possibility. You have to believe in the possibility of a positive outcome, because otherwise you're just not going to act accordingly.
Right.
So it's a kind of commitment which is almost contemptuous in circumstance. Like, that being said, all right, what tempers my optimism is the fact that people, I don't feel, adequately appreciate how corrosive inequity actually is. And what I'm really attacking there is the idea that we need to base our society on authority, or establishing structures of fixed authority. It's fundamentally demeaning, in my view, to tell people that they have to obey, that they don't have it within themselves, within their, you know, own natural resources to lead a fulfilled life without relying upon and submitting to the imperatives of something.
Like a punitive structure.
It is punitive. It's punitive even without reference to criminal justice frameworks, right? It's punitive, and that if you're not interested in making a particular amount of money in a particular sort of way, then you are going to be disadvantaged to lead even a moderately a relaxed life, right? It's incredibly stressful, to try to just get by without
Yeah.
without wanting to compromise on certain points, right? And of course, you like don't want to be, it's not like you want to be contrarian, okay? It's not like you want to always be, the specter of the table and the, killing everybody's buzz, okay? But it's like, but once you come to like a certain level of consciousness of certain ways in which we relate to each other, we're like, we need to move beyond this. We need to move beyond this hierarchy. And if you don't, that's, I think, what really creates the regression of initially positive development. So, like, you can look at Tahrir Square and the Arab Spring, initially very positive development, but then, and in part abetted by social media, but now where are they? Now Egypt is a mess. It's ridiculous. Okay, and the reassertion of an almost more despotic regime that was there under Mubarak. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And you have Libya as a mess and all the rest of it. And why did that happen? It was because there was an acquiescence to establish power, or is somehow an adequate means to move forward. Well, that's not going to work, because in my view, it's not going to work, because if you look at those structures, the game's already rigged. Now, I don't mean then that you just turn to violence, because that's a non-starter either. That just recreates the problem in different ways, and often worse ways. And I think we need to start building a culture more actively, sort of apart or in tandem or in parallel with what's established, that could ultimately supplant it without reliance on grossly violent means. And in fact, I think that's the only way to go. Of course, conflict is inevitable at some point, but I don't think it has to be the kind of violent conflict which has been the case historically. So,
well, it's kind of like Nelson Mandela saying that poverty is not something that just happens with nature. It's man-made. Mm-hmm. We make poverty, and so therefore we should be able to reverse it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a really interesting question. Do we need more or less, government, or just basically power structure to move forward? And it's a tough one. I think there's so many ways of living. I think that's. I would like to keep my mind open, because I don't know that we'll ever, I would love to live in a totally equal society, but
what would that look like?
Yeah, that's what I mean. I don't know if there's any time in history when I can point, to it and be like, I would, I mean, if anything, for that kind of anarchy view, which I love so much. My girlfriend's a huge anarchist and stuff, and so we talk about this all the time. But it's for me, I don't know, the closest thing to those imaginations of society would be probably something that was in North America and back in the day. Not even Central America, because that was pretty hierarchical, and parts of South America, certain places, the South Pacific. If you go to Vanuatu, one of those, Papua New Guinea, a few places, you probably find some of the most egalitarian societies that I know of, not even just on Earth now, but throughout history. And yeah, they're pretty cool. They're pretty great. But I feel a lot of the societies that had huge hierarchies were good too. So
and that's sort of see, if I could just push back a little bit.
Please.
I think that there is a tendency somewhat to romanticize elements of those more primary cultures, if you like. Certainly they have positive dimensions, in part because I think of the scale at which they were occurring.
Right.
They are occurring at a certain scale. Their relationships are definitely more face to face, more
Right.
concrete. So it wasn't as easy to hide, if you like, or become desensitized by bureaucracy. And so
Right.
that probably mitigated to some degree the measure at which certain injustices would come to bear. Instead, they also harbored deeply problematic elements in their own right, not the least of which would be like geriocracy, where the older generation had an incredible dominance over the young, or just hierarchy in general. And also, you can look into whether an attachment to certain older mythological frameworks could serve as itself problematic in the same way that, say, like Christian fundamentalism is problematic. So
then you need someone to implement that.
And thus, the challenge is to try and rediscover the capacity for relationship, I think, within those older cultures without falling into the traps of like provincialism and so forth, which are sometimes associated with them. In short, what we actually have to do is create something positively new from the old. That doesn't mean we throw out the old, we learn from the old, but we learn from it in a way which allows us to transcend and move beyond the strictures of our history. Of course,
and then of course we're talking to each other, and I think that we all have similar temperaments. However, if you get someone else in the room that doesn't have that, hey Shannon, then the discussion changes radically, right? And yet we have many people who have different temperaments. And so it's like finding some string that connects us all. We've got to find that.
Let me ask you, either we could do another blab about this. Because on that point, right, I'm dealing with like difficult conversations, especially among people who have strong differences, both temperamentally and philosophically or politically. What are how does one go about navigating that circumstance? I, not so long ago, sort of have begun exploring the ideas of nonviolent communication, as probably most famously put forth by Rosenberg is his last name, but his first name is eluding me at the moment. But and the strategy there is to really focus on the underlying needs behind antagonism, to sort of move beyond a presumption of strong discord. But what are your guys' thoughts on how do you deal with people with whom you're having deep difficulties, deep conflicts?
Are you talking about large groups or like someone within our environment, like say like a family away?
Well, in a way, I don't think that those two are that far apart, right? So answer the question as you were perhaps be naturally disposed to answer that question. Okay. Or if you want me to structure it, maybe I would say, why don't you answer both in turn? Like, there's a small, and then like, how do you deal with like the people at the next door? So
this right here, the face to face, is always something that works for me. Immediacy is an element that when present, it's much more effective. Not letting problems grow beyond the next thought if you can help it. And just being willing to say, whoa, totally not what I was expecting to be your reaction. I think that maybe I miscommunicated. Can we talk about this? And I've never had anyone be like, no. They're at least willing to listen, you know, like just having that sense of humility and the direction where you want to take things. If your goal is communication, then I think that more often than not, you'll be able to achieve it.
I think it's interesting that you introduced the notion of humility and also the notion of direction, because a lot of times I feel that the problem is the commitment to agenda gets in the way of, real interaction. You enter the conversation and you want an outcome. It may be the case that you can't have that luxury if you want the conversation to be truly productive. You actually have to be open to any outcome, and thus the need for humility. What are your thoughts, Daniel?
I absolutely agree with both of you guys. I think it's better, if you have a difference with somebody, then it can be seen as an opportunity, and I think what both you guys were getting at, that it's an opportunity for learning at that point. But that's if both people, humility is probably like the key to that, to unlocking that potential, but it's hard, look at like the political discourse today, like if you're sat face to face with somebody who's like super into Donald Trump, for instance, that's, I think that's like the big, it's tough, and somebody like, there's people spitting on people's faces, and racial slur. It's like, it's interesting. It's almost getting worse in some sense, like the divides, so it's hard. Like, it's one thing to say, I would always love to build with somebody and find the places where we can come together and learn from each other's, you think that way, I think this way. Well, what do we both have in common? Well, what are both our goals, that why we're seeing things differently? Oh, well, that's a good point you raised. And he actually thinks that's a good point I raised. Yeah. and then you come to, but it's easier to put it like that sometimes than to tend to
like carry it out.
Yeah. But it's absolutely, it's crucial.
Yes, it is crucial.
It's funny okay, so since you brought up Trump, I wasn't going to say his name, but you did. So I kind of wonder if our globalizing has made it even more difficult for those of us who maybe would have seen him as maybe more moderate in times past. We wouldn't have been able to see as much of the way that the way that others, other nations and people from other countries see him, because that it matters to me a lot. And I've always thought this way. And I think this way even more so now that I talk to friends every day in different countries.
And sorry, which way?
Like, I don't want my friends to think that my president is a dummy head.
Oh yeah.
I think that the case of Donald Trump and just points again to like the incredible inadequacy of our inherited political structures. The very fact, and I would actually append to that the remark that they're as awful, as reactionary, as absurd as Donald Trump is. Even if
awful, we stress awful. Just kidding.
it's ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. I mean that someone like him can make a joke about menstruation cycles and be taken seriously as a political candidate. I mean, that's just it's just bloody insane. Okay, now I would. I mean, the only point of encouragement to be drawn from it is this: that I don't think I just can't believe he really actually has as much appeal as the mainstream media wants us to believe that he has. I think that he has that he resonates with a segment of the population that is vocal, precisely because they're disempowered by the very economic structures for which he stands. Okay, and that noise creates the impression that he has more credibility than he actually does.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't take much in the way of reasoning to dismiss at least the persona of Donald Trump. Who knows who like Donald Trump actually is?
Right.
Okay. So, but I was going to add to that the perhaps provocative statement that even if Bernie Sanders was to enter into the presidency, would that really be that much different than Donald Trump?
Yes.
But he is not talking about. But he's not. But I mean, obviously he's preferable. But Bernie Sanders isn't talking about dismantling the U.S. base system. He's not talking about radically altering market structures.
Right.
He's fundamentally a reformist candidate. Okay, and obviously I would far prefer is really even not an adequate word, Bernie Sanders to Donald Trump. But bottom line, even he is not going to do the job. What's necessary is to establish something which is truly novel that goes beyond the capacity of the status quo.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for my part, if I was going to endorse anybody, it would probably be Jill Stein of the Green Party.
Yeah, that's what
Your sound cut out for me. Who did you say?
Jill Stein
of
the Green Party.
That's me all the way. Jill Stein all the way for sure. And then everybody tells me, so you throw your vote away, and but it's like, I mean, you're absolutely right. Yeah, Jill Stein's the only one who talks about like market structures, and it's really the military. Like that's the elephant in the room for the U.S. Like we could afford to have free healthcare and education, but we spend it on just this silly military technology that it's the way the reason the world is the way it is. But that's why for me I don't even see like much of a hope in the States, like reasoning wise, like how you said, like a bit of reasoning would dismiss like Donald Trump's like political persona. You're absolutely right, but I don't know I interface with Americans all the time that I'm just like, they're not going to have that reasoning.
I just met someone. It was my first person that I've actually talked to, and that was on Blab, who said that he likes him. And I was like, you're joking. You're serious. Oh, okay. No, interesting.
Yeah.
Without making those faces, but I had all those faces inside my head.
Totally.
He said his reasoning was because he has enough money that he feels like he, can.
That's it. Right.
And I'm like, well, do you know anything about his track record? And I actually did say this out loud. I did. I said he may have money. I would just maybe suggest that you look into how much money he's made for other people. Maybe.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of people actually in Hawaii who like Trump, man.
See, I think that he's got this like, oh, he's the maverick. He's not beholden to the establishment. It's like
he's the bad boy. No, he's
okay.
a guy that has like an eagle that didn't even like him and tried to take his fake hair off of his head because the eagle didn't even like him. Okay,
But here's we need to become disciplined, right? Because it's a serious problem. It's like we have to be disciplined personally.
Yeah.
I mean, speaking for myself, like I have to be disciplined to stay like with this person who likes Donald Trump. Like, okay, you like Donald Trump. Like,
oh, you're like with someone?
Not really.
That would be
what I mean, like, how do you stay in conversation with someone who is like there? Like, that's where they are.
That's perfect. That's like,
okay. How do you meet them in a constructive way to move forward? Right.
Right.
Because it's like it just blows me away, and it comes back to the fact that we tend to like circle with similar minds, right? Like you said before, Kristin, probably we're all kind of similar in temperament, right? But there's a whole universe of people who diametrically are opposed to where we are respectively oriented, right? So the challenge is to resist the tendency to just stay with those with whom you agree, and to stay open and humble when you encounter someone who may like resonate with Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
How is that even possible? And in a way, actually, it comes back to our origin, right?
Yeah.
The question of cultural appropriation, and the question is, well, okay, my intuition is that most people who support Donald Trump would consider cultural appropriation, not that they would necessarily put it in those terms, as a benign phenomenon, and they have difficulty understanding why individuals even consider it to be an issue. So the question is, how is it that they are in this space where for them it's a non-issue? How are they in that space, and how do you use that to like?
And then when we're thinking about taking it beyond just interpersonal relationships, but actually governance, we've got to try, or at least attempt to find a leader who will be able to lead all of us and meet most of the needs of all of the people. Well,
see, there's a question, right? Like, I don't really feel like, I think we all have to lead, okay? I don't think we need a messiah.
Yeah, no. I just mean like we elect a president. That I was not meaning to put that kind of burden on anyone.
Well, yeah, I didn't mean that literally, like wasn't necessarily reporting like a theological claim there. But I mean, I think we have to look at more radically democratic structures, but initially on a local or municipal scale, because even in a representative framework, as soon as you start giving power away, I think it's very difficult to stay in the game all the way through the end. So even electing a president and creating a figure to whom you're subordinating yourself that way, I think may in fact contribute to the issue. It's a complicated.
Yeah, I get it.
Matter. So, and I hope to forgive if I seem somewhat contrarian there.
No, I get what you're saying. Yeah, you're right. I believe
it. So, but you were going to say beyond interpersonally, how do we interact with governmental structures? And I think that the idea is that you have to, you want to move beyond a merely local scale. That's necessary, but in virtue of the need for immediacy to create effective conversation, I think we don't have to start locally, as frustrating as that might be. Did that follow for you guys, or what do you think?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I follow. Did you have something that you want to say, Daniel?
Oh no. I totally agree. You know.
I think there is also this new era that we talked a bit about that we're entering, in which we're no longer only influenced by who we can touch. We also have this global nation that influences our decisions on a day-to-day basis, who we're going to get into a blab with, who we're going to make a post about, who we're going to choose to market for, what cause we're going to get behind. And that's something that scales differently than just what we've been used to. So it's, I don't know, we've got some growing pains to do, or to have experience.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the difference is always going to be there. You know, it's just like how extreme is the difference, and how, you know, just there's got to be like a level of sanity, you know, and it's easy to lose it. You know, we've seen like in history, and the U.S. is, you know, we got to be a little bit careful, I think, you know, and I think, you know, we would all agree with that, but yeah, there's, you know, the position we're in right now it's a little bit dangerous, you know. I think we can all see it. I mean, the United States is a dangerous place for the world, that it has been basically for its entire existence. But, you know, I think the question is, are we gonna stop? You know, and that's like the promise that Obama made, and which was not even close to seen through, was, you know, that this, you know, he gave everybody
possible.
He
ran a platform. He ran the platform that he wanted to see happen and carry through.
You're being more generous than I would be, Kristin.
Well, like to end the war, you know, he said he would end the war like on his first day or something like that. You know, I remember he said so much stuff. You know, it's wild when you think back to it. But then, yeah, I mean, I think we shouldn't have been fooled for sure. But
I wasn't at first. I thought he was the Antichrist. I didn't vote for him the first time around. I literally did. Like, I'm not as religious as I was then, but maybe because of him. No, I'm just kidding. I don't think he's the Antichrist though. I really I did not like him. Everyone was so happy, like around me. Everyone was so happy that he was getting elected, and I was like, "No, you don't understand. Our life is over as we know it."
He's a tragic, whoever he is personally.
Yeah,
he's funny. He's got a great voice. I can't wait until he gets to be just an entertainer.
Signs off on assassinations every Tuesday, and is overseeing the expansion of drone warfare and American surveillance state beyond the wildest dreams of even the Bush administration.
Right.
My.
And then it just, you know, it begs the question: who's really doing things? You know, is if the Bush administration and the Obama administration essentially like accomplished the same goals, just under different like cloaks, then what's going on here? You know, and that's why it's so important that we address it. You know,
it's the Koch brothers. We get rid of them, and then we'll be fine.
Yeah,
have it all worked out.
Another piece of the puzzle. Now listen, I guess we have been going for about 90 minutes, so maybe we should wrap it up a bit. So
let's end it on a better note than my Koch brother one.
No. So, but I was just, you know, I suppose in closing, you know, what like do you think is something which one can, you know, vitally do to help the world. And if you want, try and connect it with the theme of cultural appropriation, but that's not strictly necessary. So
Do you say that choose one thing?
yeah, or I mean, I don't want to constrain your response too strictly,
Right.
but it'd be nice to try and not try and move beyond
The silliness that
your
entered in.
conversation. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts?
For me, it's like the big one. The only way that I can see to move past all of this stuff, and it's I pretty much say the same things, over and over. But like it's for me, it's my theme, and if somebody else can like convince me otherwise, I'd be happy to move past it. But it's just thinking about like ending the colonialism, the Western imperialism that's gone on for 500 years. If we can end that, we probably can move into like a new phase. But it's been, capitalism as a result of that, and it just hasn't ended. I think when we say post-colonialism or neo-colonialism, none of those things are realistic. This is colonialism. It's the same colonialism from Christopher Columbus. It hasn't really changed, and so understanding that, I think, is the big one. If we can all do that, and we can stand then, so I'm trying to get back at cultural appropriation, because I love, the idea of culture. I love culture. But yeah, we're absolutely appropriating if we're in this position of colonizer, which we still are, not necessarily like powerful, but we're just colonizing, it's military structure and so on. So I think that you're learning about how we can be in true solidarity, which is like political and economic solidarity. And so for me, it's reparations. If the West can understand how to give reparations, not just for African American slavery, but there's a big thing right now. There's a big push in the Caribbean. There's basically the EU of the Caribbean is called CARICOM, and the Prime Minister of England went to Jamaica, and the Prime Minister of Jamaica told him that, yes, we're seriously going to be asking for reparations. And they just laughed. England laughed. They've heard it a couple times the last few years. They're laughing. I'm
surprised.
The Jamaicans aren't laughing. They're dead serious.
They should have.
Yeah. So, there's a really good Oxford debate that happened last year about reparations, India and Africa and Caribbean. If we can take that kind of stuff seriously, we might be able to move past. And if we can take the Native American struggles seriously, I think Hawaii is a great one to latch onto. And
what do you guys think about Hawaii? Do you think it's even possible?
They're going to get their freedom in a couple of years, and they're dealing with the UN. So I'm kind of working with some of those guys, and that's how I found out about Blab, is because we're doing a couple little like Blab talk sessions. Where basically we get some of the big guys on here who go to the UN and who are fighting for the independence for Hawaii, and then there's like a lot of I guess we all found out about Blabs because there's a lot of Hawaiian guys here who live in the U.S. Yeah, and then there's other Hawaiian. There's a bunch of Hawaii people on here, but we're going to be doing a bunch of those. You guys I would love it if you guys jumped in and asked questions. Hopefully more soon.
I got to know a few of the Hawaiian blabbers like a couple of weeks ago. Breezy, he's so cool. They're all really cool. I grew up with Polynesians, and so like it just feels natural. It feels like home to be.
That's cool
with them. But like one of them was saying that he didn't even think that Hawaii could exist without the help of the mainland.
Yeah. It's a lie.
I'm so sorry to jump in. I just want to let you guys know that I might drop out because my battery is low.
Okay. Tell us your thing. Tell us your one thing.
Well, I think that it sounds kind of hokey maybe, but I think what's really crucial is for people to like have the courage to follow their intuition and to make that like real in conversation. Because I believe people naturally understand that it's deeply problematic to condone certain policies, you know, whether they're being advanced by someone as egregious as Donald Trump or someone else. You know, there's a knowing, I believe, in the human heart that way leads to madness, right? But it's not easy. It's not easy to stand up all the time in conversation because you're afraid that it's going to result in, you know, you being turned into a kind of like social ostracized, yes, you know. But I think that if people were to just do that with greater resolution, you know, that, you know, could be enormously powerful. So if I was to say one thing, even though it sounds kind of hokey, I think that would be it. So,
and I will support that with my one thing when entering into conversations, being willing to be humble enough to see another vantage and admit that you might be wrong.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Yeah. And so I just threw a few things up on the side that if you guys Google and just check out there, that's basically the Uhuru movement is pretty much a world international African diaspora and African struggle. Fascinating guys. Mexica movement, a lot of people have problems with, think they're racist, but they really aren't. You know, the truth is very interesting. And Keanu Sai is one of the big guys from Hawaii. You know, those are things that I would always put out to people just because that's how you can stand in solidarity. So if we're talking about cultural appropriation and you want to move past that, listen to me. You know, these are excellent movements.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you guys for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Right. Thank you.
If you have a link to the talk that you were talking something about reparations, I don't know if you have that link.
Yeah. Can I just like me with somehow in here? Yeah, tweet it to you. Okay. Yeah. Sweet. Okay, thanks. I think I'm following you. Yeah, most definitely. Those are, and I just did a documentary actually with one of the Uhuru movement guys. And so I'll send that to you guys as well.
Awesome.
Yeah, if you can check it out, that'd be great. Yeah, thanks, guys.
Well, I think we'll go ahead and leave it there. Thank you, Kristin, for joining me. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we'll have more conversations down the line. And thanks to everybody who's listened or who's listening. So, yeah. And have a lovely evening.
You guys as well. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye. Aloha.
Hello.
No. Talofa.
Talofa.